No, a river empire doesn't need an ocean to set the price of the world. You start with a scale, a handful of dust that shines like trapped suns, and a road that breathes heat. You feel it before you see it. The baked glare off the laterite, the hush in the alley behind a market wall where the air smells of leather, cola nuts, and camel. Your palm sweats around a tiny brass weight. The pan dips. The needle steadies. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, a merchant you'll never meet adjusts his ledger because your hand said so. How? That's the puzzle you came for. If evidence first alt history is your thing, subscribe to What If Wars and walk with me. You begin where the river curls and widens, where the Niger keeps a quiet heartbeat under the sun. You walk through Timbuktu at noon, past courtyards that hide shade like a secret, past scholars of Sankore rolling arguments like prayer beads, past low rooms where ledgers whisper. You keep moving south to Djenné, mud walls ribbed like the flanks of a living animal, then east to Gao, a city that smells of smoke and iron. These are not myths. These are hands, weights, stamps, and agreed-upon measures. Gold dust tapped neat onto oiled parchment. Sealed gourd. A nod. A price. You lift your eyes toward the sources. Bambuk Bure. Names like flint in the mouth, gold pulled from riverbeds and hard ground, sifted through woven baskets, dried in the sun. Across the wide, dry north lies Taghaza, where salt rises out of the earth like teeth. A caravan takes form. Drivers, guards, interpreters, men who know which well is bitter and which well is life. They aim for Tuwat and Sijilmasa, the oases and market doors of the Maghreb, where the desert loosens its fist at last. Copper from Taghaza glints dull red in the load. Dinars change hands, stamped with faith and power, skimming like flat stones across a trade that has its own gravity. You count distances not in miles, but in skins of water and the shadows of dunes by late afternoon. What if you could reach into that gravity and tilt it? Not everywhere, not all at once, just at the choke where numbers turn into needs. Is that how a river builds a sea? The first interruption hits like a cymbal, a king on the move, cloaks and banners, a procession bright enough to knock color into Cairo's eyes. The year is 1324. Mansa Musa rides toward Mecca with so much gold that prices in the city sag, not for a day or a season, but long enough that chroniclers, Al-Umari listening to merchants in Cairo, Ibn Battuta passing through later with dust still on his sandals, Ibn Khaldun writing a theory of why empires breathe in and out, keep coming back to the shimmer that trailed him. One journey bends money. What would a policy do? Hold a coin, feel the stamp, hear the clink against brass. You stand in a courtyard and recalibrate a weight. Your scribe records the rate for dust to dinar. Out in the alleys, men argue in Arabic and Songhay and Mande, and the argument itself is a market. At sunset, the muezzin's call blends with the scrape of scales. These are the sounds of influence well before any cannon speaks. You test a sharper question. How could an inland court steer the hunger of coasts? You do not conjure ships from nothing or shout storms into obedience. You accept the Sahara's appetite. You acknowledge the river's moods, how the Niger swells and pulls back, how a sandbar moves like a living thing, how the mangrove at the ocean mouth clenches its green fist. You know the Tuareg ride hard in the north and the mossy press from the south, that Songhai grows taller in the river light, that the gatekeepers at Sijilmasa and Tunis count favors and tally grudges. You breathe through it, then you look for levers that already exist, close to the wrist. Your first lever is price. You can't own every vein of Bambuk or Bure, but you can standardize the weight that judges every grain of dust. You can seal. You can punish false measures and reward clear ones. A gold market, once precise, begins to hum in a tighter register. The second lever is passage. Oasis by oasis, you can escort caravans, insure them, cut out the small theft that bleeds profits dry, and concentrate the large toll in your own hands. The third lever is information. Routes written properly. Flood calendars learned like liturgy. Lists of farewells and dangerous ones, copied by fatigued ink at night under a cold sky. Information makes time predictable. Predictability makes distance shorter than it looks. But you still feel the draw of the West, where the river meets the sea in a mouthful of mud and rumor. Is there a way to stand at that wet threshold and count more than fish? Could small holes, built in a yard of Iroko and pitch where the Gambia or Senegal opens its brown hand, nose along the coast and set the terms for those curious captains coming down from Portugal? Not yet. Not without craft and charts. Not without men who can lay a straight course by stars already known in Timbuktu's books, but not yet taught with a sailor's urgency. The thought is a spark in dry tinder. You do not blow on it yet. Another pattern interrupts your certainty. A ledger arrives from the north with a Mosuli scribe's neat hand. Prices shift in Tunis. A rumor of a new route whispers through Tuwat. If your fingers tighten on the weight, the needle jumps. But the desert answers with a laugh. Distance, thirst, dunes. The river answers with its own smile. Flood soon, wait, move. So you stand in the heat and let the argument sharpen. Could a court in Niani, or wherever the throne sits today, lay a hand on Taghaza and Sijilmasa, on Timbuktu and Djenné and Gao, on caravan and mosque and mint, and through that hand press lightly enough to steer, hard enough to matter, not to rule everything, to price the thing the world wants most? Before you touch a single solution, look again at the map that isn't a map. Wells like beads on a string, cities like knots where scholars and factors trade memory, river bends like questions lingering in the dust. The constraints wait out there like heat mirages, and the road toward them is long. You start with the empty. Not the market days or the counting houses, the space between. The stretch where a mistake has no witness but heat. The Sahara is not a blank, it is arithmetic. Wells like beads, but some beads have cracked. Miss one and everything after it drops away. You measure a caravan not by pride, but by thirst. Skins that sweat in the dark. Sacks that leak salt onto camel hair. Men who taste grit at dawn to guess the wind. A rumor outruns you. A well near Tuwat gone brackish. You recalk the spacing. The line tightens. One more day between waters becomes a bet with a terrible bookkeeper. How do you price fear? You pass Taghaza. Salt doesn't sparkle here. It tears skin. Men carve it in blocks from the earth and sleep on slabs of the same stuff, crusted white as if winter had forgotten to melt. The place reeks of the mine and of distance. Yet this is food for caravans and cities, the other half of a bargain that gold alone cannot close. If you touched Taghaza too hard, the desert would break your hand. If you touched it too lightly, rivals would touch it for you. You keep walking. The river promises ease, then laughs. The Niger is a living calendar, shy in one season and swollen in another, a hand that opens and closes. In flood it spreads wide, feeding a green labyrinth in the inner delta, where channels shift and reed beds whisper secrets only boatmen can hear. In low water, it turns sly, dragging sandbars across yesterday's paths, making a fool of maps drawn too confidently at noon. You load by the pulse of this animal, not by will. Miss the pulse and a month of goods sits in a cellar complaining quietly to itself. What does control mean when a river keeps its own time? At the coast, the earth grows teeth. Mangrove roots knit the tide into a wall. River mouths guard themselves with bars of sand that slide under the breakers and wait. A canoe knows this place. A deep hole does not. The wind is not a friend. It is a mood. Swell rolls in from far-off storms you will never see, lifting and dropping any craft that misreads the rhythm. Stand on the bank at the Senegal or the Gambia and listen. The sea does not invite. It interrogates. Could a river empire answer without learning a new language? You turn to men on horseback, men under dust-blue veils, men who ride the edges of your routes with patience. Tuareg bands know the sky like a clock, and the dunes like a memory palace. They appear where the camel files thin, and the guards get sleepy, asking for tax in a grammar enforced by spears. To the south, the Mosi don't negotiate a tariff. They test a frontier, probing villages and caravans alike, not for coin, but for proof of weakness. You can bargain with a merchant. You must reckon with a neighbor. Shadow grows on the river. Gao stretches, shoulders squaring, and, in the light that follows, you can already make out the outline of men who will be called Songhai. Their boats move with plain confidence. Their courtyards echo with a new certainty. This is not rebellion. It is gravity reorganizing itself. Empires inhale and exhale. You have read the theory. Now you feel it underfoot. If you press here, the ground presses back. Beyond the dunes, gatekeepers light lamps. Sijilmasa counts. Tunis counts. Every bale, every sack, every rumor that hardens into a price. You might imagine that gold is the only weight on the scale. The clerk behind the counter knows better. He weighs politics, gossip, the illness of a governor in Fez, a skirmish on a date road, a rumor that a new coastal market offers cloth at a daring rate. He squeezes a toll not just for revenue, but for leverage. How do you price the right to pass when the right itself is a moving target? A sharp question cuts the heat. What happens if the flood is late, and a well runs dry, and a gate raises its fee on the same week? You don't get three separate problems. You get one large knot. Caravans stack at a choke point. Camels eat rations meant for customers. A price in Cairo twitches as if stung by a fly you can't see. The market in Timbuktu answers with a shrug you cannot afford. You touch the weights in your pouch and think of measures. Gold dust is honest only when the scale is honest. But the honesty is fragile. Fraud travels easily in a world of grains and gourds. A shave here, a damp bag there, and an empire leaks value slow as a cracked jar. You can punish thieves. You cannot punish doubt. Doubt itself is a tax. You look again at the coast and see not just danger, but latency. The wood is here. The pitch is here. The stars are here, catalogued in books that speak of Mecca and the straits and islands farther than a camel's patience can carry you. A thought shivers the skin. Knowledge you already own might change shape if taught for water instead of sand. You do not indulge the thought yet. You mark it and step away. Another interruption, colder this time. A name spoken low in a market, Portuguese. Not a storm today, but a weather front coming. Hulls designed for the swell you fear. Cannon that speak a language you haven't had to learn. They are not here in force, not yet. But the bargaining table is shifting its legs, so the ladder stands in front of you. Thirst and distance, flood and bar, riders and rivals, gatekeepers whose ink can reroute years. None of this yields to bravado. Each rung cuts the hand, but each also offers a grip if you find it. You close your fist around the air and feel where the levers might sit, close to the wrist, not in fantasy but in craft. Then you wait at the edge of decision, desert light bright enough to hurt, river light softer but no less sure, and you ask the only question that matters. If control is not everywhere, where is it enough? You stop walking and start building, not in speeches, in wood, metal, ink, and habit. You gather the scales and make them speak the same language. Brass weights recast to a single truth. Seals that bite soft wax with a crest no counterfeit can imitate. The market in Timbuktu learns it first. Dust is dust, weight is weight. Argument is over. Djenné follows, then Gao. You post a scribe beside each scale. He records the morning rate and stamps the packet. The packet becomes a promise that survives a week in the desert. Doubt leaks value. You cork the leak. You move north, where the earth tastes of salt. Taghaza is not conquered, it is contracted. The mine works under its own rules, but your rules wrap it. Garrison light, not heavy. Enough to escort, not to bully the ground. You rewrite the toll, blocks out, gold, or cloth in, with a margin everyone can predict by the second rains. Skimming stops being theft and becomes policy. A pattern interrupt snaps the mind. Imagine a price that no one loves but everyone trusts. Trust is faster than any camel. You paint the road with law. Oasis by oasis, you publish a schedule. Departure windows, guard rosters, waypoints to reach before the moon tilts. Caravans leave in convoys and purchase a paper no one can eat but everyone respects. A state guarantee. If bandits cut a line inside the guaranteed corridor, indemnity pays a share. If thirst or folly strays outside it, the sand keeps what it takes. Premium in dust, payout in dinars. The math is simple. Risk that can be priced breeds courage. Courage that can be priced breeds volume. The mint speaks next. You rent a courtyard close to the river and build heat that roars like an animal. Copper from Taghaza, gold from Bambuk and Bure, alloyed to a discipline a Qadi in Fez would recognize by touch. Dyes cut by men who have learned their art in the Maghreb, hired with honor and pay. Your dinar carries a face the Mediterranean understands. Inward, dust still rules everyday trade. Outward, stamped coin glides where ledgers need stamps to breathe. A flipped image. You do not chase foreign standards, you force them to greet yours. Ink finishes what fire begins. Timbuktu turns scholarship into navigation, not sermons, route books. Port-a-land-like notes for the Sahara and the river, wells listed with the taste of their water. Distances measured by the time it takes a camel to darken with sweat. Flood heights written beside months. Sandbars mapped with the memory of last season's mistakes. Another room trains tongues. Berber and Arabic to Mande. Wolof to Italian. A boy who could only name the stars as prayer now names them as bearings. The same sky, but repurposed. You lift your gaze to the west, where the river inhales salt. The coast does not welcome a keel, it tests it. So you start small and stubborn, a state yard at the mouth of the Senegal or the Gambia. Iroko beams that laugh at rot. Planks from African hardwoods scarred with adze marks. Pitch warmed until it smells like thunder. Hull forms borrowed from Maghrebi coasters. Lateen sails cut to sip the wind, close-hauled along a treacherous shore. These are not ocean palaces. They are coastal knives, two-masted shallow draft, able to cross the bar on a wind that a river pilot knows by the texture of the morning. The first voyages don't chase horizons. They calendar them. Soundings, sand movements, weather windows logged by pilots who can read a mangrove's posture. You do not sail empty. You build bonded warehouses just upriver from the bar. Italians earn a long room under supervision, bolts of cloth stacked to the rafters, balances inspected daily. In exchange, they teach rigging tricks, show how a hull breathes under pressure, how to splice a rope that won't betray you at dusk. You grant them storage that removes one layer of bribe from their math. They grant you time. Time is a port. North across the dunes, you write letters with more steel than flourishes. Safe conduct stamped in Timbuktu and countersigned in Sijilmasa. Marriage made with a Marinid cousin, whose dowry is not just silk, but silence on certain tolls. A salt tariff that pinches Tunis less than Fez to loosen one gatekeeper from another. Diplomacy becomes a cost of goods line, not cheap, cheaper than war. A sharp question jolts the table. What changes when a merchant in Tunis knows a convoy leaves Taghaza on the 7th and arrives at Tuwat with 3% insured? He bids differently. He refuses panic prices. He plans. Panic is profit for the quick and loss for the many. You starve panic. Inside the counting house, the ledgers stop scratching like nervous mice and begin to purr. Transaction costs sag. Fraud becomes rare and therefore expensive. The caravan master, who once spat at the idea of a schedule, now checks your posted times like a sailor checks tide. Even a rival learns to trust your hatred of surprise. You return to the yard at the river mouth and watch a pilot stand on a sandbar at low tide, teaching with his feet. Here, the bar moves each fortnight. Here, a channel holds after storms if you hug the mangrove by so many paddle lengths. The knowledge is not new. The use is. Sailors and scholars rub shoulders under the same rafters. A muezzin's call lifts over the clatter of tools. A sailor answers without pausing his splice. You set one last lever where it hurts. Preferential customs at your gates for merchants who accept your weights, your coin, your schedule. Refusals pay extra and stand last in line. No edicts about global control, no fantasies about ruling seas. Just choke points turned into habits, habits turned into prices, prices turned into power. Another pattern flips the map in your head. Arrows of value no longer stream seaward to be blessed with legitimacy and return as fate. They begin inland, at your scale, your seal, your calendar, and walk to the coast carrying your terms. A Portuguese captain arriving hungry for bargains learns that the market has already eaten. He can buy. He cannot unset the table. You breathe, and the desert breathes with you. Nothing magical has happened. Wells still run brackish. Floods still misbehave. Riders still test your edges. But the knot you feared begins to loosen because you pull the strands in order. The river, the salt, the coin, the yard, ink and iron, weight and wind. You feel the system catch, like a heavy door finding its hinge. Now, watch what the door opens onto. You feel the change first in the silence. Markets used to hiss with rumor. Now they breathe. A merchant in Tunis looks up from a ledger and does not flinch when the door opens. He already knows when the Taghaza convoy left, how many guards rode with it, which wells were bitter, and that indemnity stands behind the dust if a knife caught the moonlight. He doesn't gamble, he prices. North, the clerk at Sijilmasa checks your seal and waves the line forward with a boredom that used to be fear. He doesn't love you. He loves the schedule. When a gate loves a schedule, tolls sag from predation to policy. The tax they hide in the ink still hurts, but it hurts the same way, every time. Predictable pain is opportunity disguised as scar tissue. You step through. In Timbuktu, the scale sings a tighter note. Fewer disputes, fewer rehearsed outrages in crowded courtyards. A buyer and seller touch the stamped packet and skip 3 arguments that used to drain a day. The scholar who once lectured on law now copies route books and flood tables. And the copyists work by lamplight for merchants who hate being surprised more than they hate being taxed. You watch a young interpreter move between Arabic and Mande as if the languages had always been neighbors. He isn't translating words, he's translating risk. The river yard at the mouth breathes resin and tide. Your shallow draft coasters rise and fall in their slings like animals dozing. They aren't pretty, they are punctual. A pilot steps into a hull and taps a plank with a knuckle, listening for rot. The boat runs the bar on a morning when the swell is obedient and the wind smells like rain, carries bales upriver to bonded rooms where Italians count cloth in the shade under your eyes. They pay for the room, for the silence around the room, for the right to leave without paying for the same conversation 3 times. In exchange, your rigging gets smarter, your sailcloth less likely to betray you, your yard foreman able to name a flaw by the sound it makes when stretched. A Portuguese captain noses in from the south, hull scarred, cannon quiet, crew watchful. He expected the old mess, wet markets that turn to mud underfoot, scales that tell jokes, middlemen who multiply in the dark. Instead, he finds a timetable pinned to a post and a pilot who quotes a tide by hour, a warehouse with a lock you recognize and a log you can read. A customs clerk who shrugs and points to your posted rates. He bargains. He does not dictate. The bargaining table is no longer tilted toward the sea. Pattern interrupt. You hold the map in your mind and flip the arrows. For a generation, the flow of value was drawn in blue, rushing seaward to be certified by foreign coin and returned as fate. Now, prices form inland and move outward. A dinar stamped to Maghrebi taste glides north, because your weights made the dust honest and your escort made the road less murderous. Salt leaves Taghaza in blocks cut neat because your garrisons made theft too expensive and your indemnity made delay survivable. The coast quotes inland terms. Consequences thicken. With risk shaved down, volume rises. A caravan that once feared traveling in daylight joins a convoy and announces its schedule in the mosque courtyard. A hanger-on who lived on the margins of panic now can't find purchase. Panic loses its small empire. Fraud gets lonely. The premium that fed bandits and gatekeepers starved of policy shrinks into a line item. Not gone. Priced. You see spillover where you didn't plan for it. A farmer along the lower Niger plants for the flood window because the warehouse upriver posts buying days a month in advance. A craftsman in Gao shifts from raw barter to stamped coin for long-distance orders because his cousin swears a Qadi in Fez will accept the weight by touch. A scholar adds a column to a route book. Not just water and distance, but fee by season, gate by temper. Information compounds like interest if you stop interrupting it with fear. Not everyone smiles. A Tuareg band misses a convoy on a guaranteed road and takes its tax on a village outside the corridor. Mazi raiders feel the edge of your patrols and look for a softer angle. A gatekeeper raises his toll on shipments that refuse your weights in a last show of pride. Your policy is a hand closing. Pressure bulges elsewhere. You expected this. You listen for where the bulge becomes a bruise. Another sharp question. What happens to Cairo when gold flows not in bursts that bruise prices, but in beads that keep time? The city stops lurching. Money breathes instead of gasping. A scribe who once cursed your king's pilgrimage now nods at a steady line. Stability is not a poem. It is bread that costs the same across a season. Somewhere, a landlord's temper cools because his ledger forgot how to panic. The sea notices. Your coasters trace the Senegambia coast in spells of fair weather, charting eddies, logging birds and winds. The way caravans log the taste of wells. A storm takes one, and the yard writes a rule in blood. No departure on the falling bar after a northern gale. You lose a hull and do not lie about why. The rule enters the calendar. The calendar lowers loss. Loss, lowered, becomes a new floor for price. Diplomacy narrows the lanes of danger. The Marinid cousin's dowry smooths a toll for a season that used to snag caravans like thorns. Tunis finds that a preferential salt tariff sweetens cloth sales in a way that gossips turn into custom. A Venetian factor writes home that the inland weights match his own. This week, last week, the week before. And the letter itself becomes advertising. Habit travels faster than decree. You stand again in the counting house and feel the room's temperature change. It's not cooler, it's calmer. The world is still sharp. Drought can still insult the flood. Rivals can still grow. But the center of gravity of trade has shifted a few fingers inland. And the shift sticks because it's built from small, honest parts that embarrass corruption by refusing to argue with it. You have not conquered seas. You have taught prices to speak your accent. Hold that feeling, because it comes with a cost you have not named out loud. Routes harden. Winners learn to love their advantage. Labor bends under heavier loads. A neighbor eyes your bonded rooms and sees chains, not order. Your levers work, but every lever presses on someone. Before you declare victory, you have to walk through the limits and the weight of what it takes to hold a system that wants to sprawl. You feel the reach in places you never touched. In a courtyard at Sijilmasa, a broker stops peering at the horizon for a dust plume that may never arrive and instead checks the week posted for the Taghaza convoy. The spread he demands loosens by a finger's width because he no longer rents his nerves to uncertainty. A cloth dealer in Tunis adjusts his offer to match your dinar because the Qadi has decided that your stamp settles arguments faster than oaths. You do not hear any of this. You see it in the way ledgers turn from thickets into lines. In Timbuktu, the copy rooms hum. A route book goes north with notes in the margins. A well near Tuwat, still bitter. A detour that saved an hour, last flood now costs 2. A clerk's small triumph that your insured corridor paid a master who lost 3 camels to a night raid. That line of ink breeds confidence where rumor used to breed appetite. A merchant who once hoarded dust through fear watches steady coin and learns a better vice: patience. Panic prices die in alleys that used to nurture them. Along the river mouth, your yard's low roofs throw shade that smells of resin and tide. Coasters slip their moorings at the 3rd hour because the bar told the pilots to wait for that one. They hug the mangrove by the exact distance a man can pace in a breath. Tack once, then lean into a wind that friends claim doesn't exist because it is too small to brag about. They ghost north, 10 or 20 miles, enough to meet a rendezvous you posted months ago. The warehouse upriver is full but not crowded. Full is profit, crowded is fear. Another pattern interrupts the story you used to tell yourself about the sea. A Portuguese captain enters your river and loses his advantage before his anchor kisses mud. He finds his choices boxed by your calendar, your weights, your rooms. He can bargain, but the place where his will turns into a price is inland, where a scholar's ink dried yesterday. He writes home that the coast now behaves like a market instead of a fever. He hates it. He comes back. In the Maghreb, the ripple alters more than numbers. A Marinid clerk, who once fattened a toll to cover for late caravans, learns that late isn't coming. He trims the toll before someone else trims his post. In Tunis, a factor stops paying the same bribe twice because the bonded room upstream has no patience with repetition. A Venetian who never learned your names can now predict your seasons better than he can predict his own city's quarrels. Habit is the new law. The desert adjusts in its own register. A caravan master who lived by surprise shifts to volume. He buys one more camel because the corridor pays when knives flash inside its lines. He hires a young guard who reads both Arabic and the angle of stars. He leaves on your posted week and arrives on your posted week and begins to say, "Of course," when asked if the road will hold. Of course is a revolution spoken softly. On the frontier, the pressure blurs. A Tuareg band collects its tax farther from the corridor, where the indemnity does not reach and the maps grow honest about risk again. A Mozzie raid tests a bend where your patrols thin in the reins. You answer with escorts that are visible on the days they must be visible, and invisible on the days when the math says they do more good as rumor. Control is not a fence. It is a rhythm. You feel the price of salt behave as if it had learned manners. Blocks leave Taghaza at a pace that suits the wells. They arrive with fewer teeth marks from theft and fewer delays that rot profit in the sun. A cook in Gao buys salt for a fairer rate in a hungry month. He doesn't carve your crest into his door. He just eats. Stability is a plain meal that ceases to be a story because it repeats. Eastward letters cross to Cairo in a tone that lacks panic. A money changer who once saw gold arrive like a flood that bruised markets now sees it bead like a rosary, regular, countable. His complaint shifts from chaos to margin. The difference is not poetry. It is the absence of ruin that used to be profitable to a few and fatal to many. When a city stops lurching, buildings stand longer, tempers last shorter, and small ambitions get a chance to practice. South and east, new lanes answer your pull. Hausa towns read your posted windows and send cloth with the caravans your escorts prefer. Khanum Bornu hears from a cousin that your insured corridor pays in dinars that pass a judge's touch 2 countries away. Tripoli learns a new habit: accept your stamp first and argue later. Each change is small. The sum is not. Your yard writes more rules cut from weather. No sailing on a falling wind after a dust-heavy harmattan. No crossing the bar on a swell born of a storm that never touched your sky. A hull snaps, and a line enters the book with a grief that has no poetry. Loss teaches faster than pride. The pilots nod and stop arguing with bars, and begin to argue with themselves about the finer grain of tide and current. The argument is fertile. Diplomacy grows muscle memory. A cousin's marriage smooths a gate for a season, and then for a practice, and then, almost without a word, for a norm. A Tunis tariff you tip towards salt buys you cloth that arrives on weeks with names instead of excuses. Italian brokers bring their own seals to your rooms and discover that their seals mean less than your schedule. They adapt. Rialto whispers that West Africa's dust stays honest longer than some coins that travel by deeper hulls. A rumor like that is a currency. Pattern interrupt. Flip the map again. The arrows that used to say power flows from the coast inward now look sheepish, as if they were drawn by a child who forgot where cities are born. The new arrows begin at a scale in Timbuktu, a ledger in Djenné, a guard roster pinned at Tuwat, and walk outward with terms that were once begged for at harbors. You didn't seize oceans. You taught coasts a new grammar, and yet the grammar has a shadow. Predictability hardens into expectation. Expectation demands labor on a schedule that bends backs and patience in a season that used to breathe easier. A rival inland court learns your tempo and plays harmony for a while, then tries a counter melody. Songhai's outline sharpens through the heat. The Portuguese move from rumor to routine and bring more hull and gun. You can hold lanes. You cannot freeze time. So, you stand in a counting house that you built from brass and habit and ink and watch the reach spread like a stain you wanted and a bruise you didn't. Prices answer your hand. Routes bend toward your rooms. The bargaining table sits on your floor. The consequences are real and measurable, and, in some corners, beautiful. The costs are real and human, and, in some corners, unbearable. If control is not everywhere, perhaps it is enough. But what do you pay to keep it, and what happens when the bill comes due? Here is the shape of control when you strip it of slogans. You influence bullion and salt prices at the points where dust becomes coin and blocks become rations. You fix weights and calendars inland. You ensure corridors across the sand. You post predictable customs at the gates. And you keep shallow draft knives sliding along the Senegambia coast to meet weather windows the way caravans meet wells. You do not own oceans. You own the habits that make strangers bargain on your terms. That is control enough to bend ledgers in Tunis and Cairo, and make a Portuguese captain arrive as a guest, not a judge. Name the limits before they name you. The Sahara keeps its arithmetic. A missed well still kills. The Niger keeps its pulse. A late flood still laughs at schedules. The mangrove bars still lift and settle like a chest breathing. A wrong departure still breaks a hull. Tuareg bands will test your seams when the moon says the guards are tired. Mossy pressure will look for the quiet door at the back of your map. Songhai will grow in your light until it casts its own. And when it does, your coin will have to share space on a table that used to be yours alone. Portugal will not remain rumor, holes will thicken, cannon will speak, and blue water craft will pull the bargaining table seaward unless your shallow knives stay quick and your diplomacy keeps tolls useful to those who might otherwise break you to avoid them. There is a limit under the numbers, too. Stability hardens into demands on backs and breath. Taghaza salt does not walk itself. Men carve it from earth that cuts hands and sleep on beds that taste of their own labor. Caravans do not glide on ink. They move on feet that blister and eyes that measure sky to find a well that is often smaller than hope. In markets upriver and down, people are taken and sold. If your corridors work as designed, the volume rises. And so does the temptation to turn bodies into goods faster than law can raise its hand. Speak that truth without ceremony. A system that reduces panic can increase capacity, and capacity can carry cruelty farther if you do not chain it to rule. You can set penalties. You can insist that indemnity never pays for stolen lives. You can push scholars to write law that bites harder than custom. But no weight you stamp removes the human teeth from trade. If you claim control, you inherit this. A sharp question cuts through comfort. When your seal makes gold honest and your yard makes the bar crossable, who is safer and who is easier to hurt? The answer is not the same for every village along the route. Influence that blesses a merchant can corner a farmer. A price that steadies a city can squeeze a hinterland. You built a hinge. The door swings both ways. So, what happens if the Mali Empire truly controls global trade in the only realistic sense? By owning choke points and habits. Money breathes instead of gasping. Cairo counts beads of bullion, not floods. Tunis trims its tolls to policy, not appetite. Venetian and Genoese factors learn to trust stamps that were once rumors. Portuguese hulls find pilots waiting who quote tides written in a scholar's hand. The river sends terms outward, and the coast, surprised, accepts. Your schools fill with ledgers and route books as eager as law. Your mint hums like a throat cleared before a sentence that matters. For a span of years long enough to feel like certainty, you set the expectation that trade will arrive on weeks with names and prices with reasons. And what does it not become? It does not become an empire of blue horizons. It does not erase storms or rivals or the slow, stubborn math of distance. It does not stop the rise of a neighbor whose reach fits the same river better a generation later. It does not silence cannon on a deck designed for swell you cannot tame with a pilot's foot. It does not clean the hands in the salt pits or make the caravan's thirst a story instead of a wound. It does not make you fate. It makes you a force. You stand in the mint on a night when the air tastes of metal and storm. The dies come down and the scale rings, a clear note that cuts through thunder. Outside, the river moves, not hurrying, not apologizing. Somewhere a gatekeeper leans on a post and does not raise his fee, because he expects your convoy on the day you posted 2 months ago. Somewhere else a raider sits his horse on the edge of your corridor and turns away because the math is wrong today. Somewhere a scribe copies a route and adds a line about a bar that moved and a wind that did not. Here is your answer then. Yes, a river empire could control global trade if control means the power to set habits at the points where value changes shape, to steady prices that other cities borrow for their own peace, to stand at the river mouth with craft and calendars that make foreign wills bend slightly before they speak. No, it would not own the world. It would own enough of the world's decisions to matter every day until it didn't. Until weather, rivals, new routes, or your own success hardened into something heavy enough to crack. Hold the image that will follow you out of this room. A coin cooling on a slate in stormlight. A scale settling. a ledger closing without a tremor, and the soft thud of a door you built swinging on the hinge you made. You do not pray for miracles, you pay for institutions. That is the lesson that outlives kings and caravans. If this kind of evidence-first alt history pulls you in, subscribe to What If Wars and walk the next road with me.